As of today, former President Trump and all of his 18 co-defendants, all of them in the Fulton County conspiracy case, they have pleaded not guilty to racketeering and other criminal charges. So, unity, I guess. Beyond that, though, these 19 defendants are not exactly marching in lockstep. 5 of Trump's co-defendants have filed to have their cases removed to federal court. And the arguments they are trying to make to ensure that that happens, those arguments do not look good for the former president. Take, for example, 3 of Georgia's alleged fake electors, David Schaefer, Kathy Latham, and Sean Still. Now, they have all said in their court filings that their cases belong in federal court because they were just, quote, acting to assist the president or acting at the direction of the president. Now, those arguments might help these 3 folks in claiming they were de facto federal employees, which, weird if true, and then maybe that will help them argue that they shouldn't be tried at the state level. But wow, does that argument not help their co-defendant in all of this, Mr. Donald Trump? It is essentially, Judge, we were fake electors acting at the direction of the president. We were federal fake electors, Judge. Meanwhile, Trump's own chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is making the argument that he was just doing what his boss wanted. And again, that does not exactly look good for Mr. Trump. In a hearing last week, Meadows was asked why he was so very invested in making sure the fake electors met. Mr. Meadows answered, "I knew I would get yelled at if we had not, as in not arranged the meeting of the fake electors." Well, yelled at by whom, Mr. Meadows? By the President of the United States. Oof. About a full 1/4 of Trump's co-defendants are trying either a "I was just following orders" strategy or the very novel "I was just trying not to get yelled at" strategy, both of which directly implicate former President Trump. And then Trump and 5 of his other co-defendants are trying to abandon ship altogether. They are trying to have their cases separated from the others, each man for himself or herself, sort of. Now, there are a bunch of different arguments here. Ray Smith, who is a former Trump campaign attorney who's been charged in all of this, he argues that the Georgia case, a case alleging a vast criminal conspiracy, that from Mr. Smith's perspective, it involves too many defendants. The case is too Byzantine. It is too complex for the jury to comprehend. Mr. Ray Smith argues for that reason, the court should split the defendants into little clumps of defendants so that they can each have their, quote, bite-sized cases, like cupcakes and mini cupcakes. One is bite-sized, the other is not. Okay, but there are other things apart from these requests. There are the severance requests from defendants like Trump himself and his former lawyer, John Eastman. They both are arguing specifically that they want their case split off from any of the defendants who are set to go to trial on October 23rd. They both claim that that date is way too soon, and there is no way their defense could be ready that quickly, which is, of course, amazing, considering that 2 of Trump's co-defendants, Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell, are asking for that October 23rd date and demanding a speedy trial. Then there is Sidney Powell's motion to sever her case from everybody else's because she believes her case has no substantive connection to anyone else's, which seems like a stretch given Sidney Powell's alleged involvement in the breaching of voting machines and the fact that Trump almost appointed her as special counsel to investigate voter fraud in the 2020 election. But I digress. Her co-defendant, Kenneth Chesebro, also filed a motion to sever his case from everyone else's. And then he filed again, specifically asking to have his case severed from Sidney Powell's case. Because apparently Kenneth Chesebro does not want to have his legal fate tied to Sidney Powell's, which, I got to hand it to him, is understandable. The hearing for Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro's severance motions is set for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. As for the 5 motions to remove individual defendants' cases to federal court, well, those could be granted or denied any day now. Now, if all of this feels chaotic to you, that is precisely because it is. All of these 19 defendants here are looking out for themselves. So my question is, who does this chaos benefit and who does it hurt? Joining us now are Anthony Michael Kreis, a professor of law and political science at Georgia State University, and Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. Joyce, let me first just start with you in terms of this idea that everybody wants to cut their case off from everybody else's, or with some sort of mathematical fungibility and all that. What is the judge going to be weighing here as he decides whether or not Mr. Trump, for example, can have his case severed from the rest of his 18 co-defendants?
So when you look at severance motions under Georgia law, the defendants have to convince the judge that if their case isn't severed from all of the other defendants or some of the other defendants, that they'll be prejudiced in a serious way. And defendants typically will argue that there is evidence that is admissible against a co-defendant, but that is not admissible against them, and that it would taint the jury's consideration and that they would run the risk of being unfairly convicted. That's the sort of classic case, and we see the defendants here trying to make out those arguments. For instance, Kenneth Chesebro saying, I've never been to Coffee County. I don't know Sidney Powell, so it's not fair to try me with her. I think it's very likely, though, that the judge will come back with this rejoinder. This is not a charge about Coffee County. This is a charge about a RICO conspiracy. And so the issue is whether or not the defendants participated in that, as opposed to whether each defendant committed every single overt act that's charged in the indictment. Obviously, they didn't all participate in all of them, and that's not how a conspiracy case works.